think we can start. This is the webinar for the BA in Human Geography at Birkbeck, University of London. My name is Andrea Ballatore, and I'm Program Director for the BA in Human Geography. And I will give you today an overview of why you should come to Birkbeck, what we mean by human geography, and I will show you the structure and the specificities of our program, including both the compulsory modules you will have to take and the option modules. There will be a taster session by Dr. Olivia Sheringham, who's with us in this room, and she will give you a taster of the kind of teaching we do in this program. After that, there will be a Q&A, or actually feel free to ask questions during the presentation, and I will try to answer them as quickly as possible. All right. You have a chat, so if you see in the bottom right of your interface, there is a room chat, and if you write to everyone, I will be able to see what you're typing. So don't hesitate if you have any comment or question. All right. Okay, so Birkbeck is part of the prestigious cluster of University of London that includes a lot of colleges such as University College London, SOAS, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and it's a university located right at the heart of Bloomsbury, one of the most lively and beautiful parts of the city. And it's specialized in evening teaching. So Birkbeck is a research-intensive university, meaning that all of our staff, including myself and Olivia, are doing research at international standards. And although our teaching is primarily happening in the evening. And this is a pretty unique combination, because often when you have evening teaching institutions, they tend not to do a lot of research. So this is our niche. And because we specialize in evening teaching, we can cater for the needs of working students. So if a lot of our students actually have full-time jobs or part-time jobs, and a lot of them are mature, meaning that they are slightly older than the typical 18-year-olds cohorts. So Birkbeck has always been specialized in this kind of offer, and we're very good at supporting people with complicated needs, with jobs, family commitments, and we've been very successful at that. So all of our teaching pretty much occurs between 6 and 9 p.m. To prevent questions, to anticipate questions about this, we are, of course, still in the middle of a pandemic. In September, October, when teaching starts, we don't know exactly what the situation will be like, but we are preparing for any scenario. So if there will be the right circumstances, we will do face-to-face teaching as we normally do. If unfortunately the pandemic has not gone away, we will be ready to do online teaching. Or we might also do a mixed model where we might reopen activities partially, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, as you know, this doesn't depend directly on us. It's a global and national crisis, but we hope that either way we will give you the best possible learning experience. Right. So the core topic of this BA is human geography. I put a few pictures here just to give you examples. So what do you think that human geography is? Do you have any concepts, any ideas about this field? You can type them in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. It doesn't need to be anything particularly smart or complicated. Any association that human geography springs to mind. I'll just type something in so that you see what the chat is. Can you actually see the chat? Can you type in yes so that I'm sure that the platform is working correctly? Okay, great. Yeah, the history of humanity. Definitely. So geography is a very broad field that studies. You can say that it studies humanity in a very broad sense. It studied the places where where humans originated, places where humans migrated, where humans developed cities, societies, and so on. Anthropology definitely is, we'll mention that later, but definitely anthropology is strictly related to human geography because it's about studying human societies, the development of human societies, of human culture, and in all of these, or in all of its different facets. Yeah, this is very good. Other ideas, other concepts that come to mind? I'll give you another 15 seconds. Modern movements such as migration, yeah, that's excellent. So migration is definitely a core concern of human geography because humans move on the surface of the planet, and that is one of the core factors that explain how humans developed and how settlement developed and so on and so forth. And we also talk about migration in the contemporary context, for example, with the so-called migration crisis, so migration from the global south into the global north, for example. Right, so these are all very good suggestions. Thank you. We define human geography as a social science. So a science that is actually interested in the processes that shape our contemporary social, political, economic, and cultural life. And human geography focuses on how we interact with each other as humans and how humans interact with the environment, and how these different relationships result in different places. So, for example, cities like London or Lagos in Nigeria, so they're very different places. How did they come about? Why are they so different? And so on. And also human cultures and identity. Right, so Alessandra mentioned anthropology. Human geography is a cognate discipline to sociology, anthropology, political science, and economics, but it looks at these aspects from the perspective of space and place. So space meaning the space of the surface of the Earth, where we live, and place meaning locations that have a particular importance for human activities, such as cities like London. So if you take this BA in human geography, you will engage with a lot of these issues. I put a list here. These are not the only topics you will engage with, but definitely you will think and develop advanced skills in regarding globalization, environmentalism, racism. So this is very relevant with the current protest, Black Lives Matter, and so on. Nationalism. So if you're interested in Brexit, for example, the theme of nationalism is very relevant. Community and diaspora. So again, related to migration. Communities, for example, from the Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, migration to the UK is one of the topics where we offer, where we have expertise in. And I mentioned cities a lot because the world is becoming increasingly urbanized, and cities and the urban inequalities that we encounter in cities are very important to billions of people. And we have experts. I'll show you that later, but we have experts about, for example, housing in London. So if you live in London and you pay an exorbitant rent, you will study why this is happening. International development is another aspect where we have expertise. So very important to understand the relationship between what we call the global north, so countries like the UK, and the global south. So countries that tend to be former colonies or countries of lower income, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these themes are related to social justice. So if you're interested in social justice, this is definitely a good program for you. So when you think about a BA, we tend to think in terms of levels. So we have 3 levels that we use to classify modules. Level 4 means the introductory level, where you're acquiring basic skills. You're acquiring the ability to study complex texts. You're taking notes, writing with an academic language, and so on and so forth. Then at level 5, you're delving into not only into the basic ideas of the discipline, but also into sub-disciplines. So, for example, studying specifically migration or identity, nationalism, and concepts of this kind. And you're also doing some field training. So when you look at our content, there will be our offer. You will find field trips. Unfortunately, that's another aspect that is completely dependent on the pandemic. So we hope that it will be able to offer field trips as we normally do. But this year, of course, we might not be able to, or we might have to postpone them. So just be aware that when you read about an exciting field trip, it will not happen when planned because of the pandemic. And then at level 6, we expect you to have reached a level where you can do independent work, when you can analyze sources critically, when you can conduct a piece of independent research. And I will show you in a second what that looks like. So if you join the program at a full-time student, you're expected to complete the program over 3 years. Normally, to complete a BA, you have to reach 360 credits. So you can see here that you have 120 credits per year. And in the full-time program, you're basically doing 4 modules every year. You can see here 4 modules at level in year 1. You can see 2 modules plus, so let me explain this. Some modules are compulsory. So you see here the modules that are stated in this table mean that you're kind of expected to do them. You can't avoid them because they're very important modules that give you the core knowledge of the discipline. And then you will see that you have optional credits, meaning that we give you the opportunity to choose different modules among a range of possibilities. So on the year 2, you will do 2 compulsory modules and 2 optional ones. And then year 3, you will see that essentially it's all option modules, meaning that you will be free to choose what you want to do, plus a research project or a literature review. So a research project is essentially what we also call a dissertation, a piece of independent research where you choose a topic that you're interested in, let's say migration from Eastern Europe into London. I'm just choosing an example, and you'll develop an independent study on that topic. Or if you're less inclined to do a big project of this kind, you can do a literature review, which is a critical assessment of the literature on a topic. For example, again, migration from Eastern Europe into the UK. You can do a critical review of what has been said about that in academic and other sources. And then the rest will be option modules. So this is what the program looks like if you're doing it full time. If you're doing it part-time, the content is exactly the same. So the number of credits and the number of total credits and the modules are the same, but they are spread across 4 years. So you can see them in the first 2 years. You're doing 3 compulsory modules in the first year, then 2 compulsory modules plus an optional one on the second year. And then on the third year, you have a compulsory module and 2 option modules. And in the last year, you're doing the dissertation or the literature review and other option modules. So you can see that it's the same content, just on a longer period of time. So you might wonder what the typical schedule is when you're studying at Birkbeck for a BA. So typically, if you're studying full-time, you will have to do 2 evenings a week. And as I mentioned earlier, all teaching happens between 6 and 9 p.m. And you're expected to do homework. So I'm warning you from now, it's not enough to show up and do the sessions, the teaching sessions. You have to do independent work. So it's part of higher education that you learn how to be disciplined and how to study material at your own pace in an independent way. Yeah, so an example would be that you might have to go to class on Tuesday and Thursday, right? If you're studying part-time, typically you have 1 evening a week in the same time frame, so always 6 to 9 in Bloomsbury. And you can see that that is a lot lighter. So if you have a busy life, part-time might be a better option for you. But don't worry too much about that, in the sense that we have a lot of students who start full-time because they're very, of course, excited and optimistic about how much they can work. But then life happens, jobs, children, and other things happening, and they switch to part-time. So that's also something that is not a problem at all. You can start full-time, and then when you realize that the schedule is too heavy, you can switch to part-time, or vice versa. So some people start part-time, then they realize that they want to study more. They change from a full-time job to a part-time job, and that way they can increase their commitment. But it's just to give you an idea of what your week will look like. Okay, so just to summarize the core modules, the core modules that you will do in your first or second year, depending on what if you're doing full-time or part-time, are humans in the environment, which, as the name suggests, is about studying how people think about the environment. What is the different ways of thinking about the relationships between humans and the environment we occupied and we often exploit. And then there will be introduction to spatial thinking, where you will think about, so you can see the geographic theme of space. So thinking about how things are arranged in space. So I put here a picture of a typical suburban structure. Why are things located the way they are? And this module will give you tools to think about how things are clustered in space, or how things are dispersed, and so on and so forth. Then there will be a module called Introduction to Human Geography that will cover a lot of core concepts, such as urbanization, identity, class, social class, and so on and so forth. Then other core modules are social inequalities and diversities. So I put here a picture a famous picture of a slum in an informal settlement near a very expensive, exclusive condo. And that is, of course, a very extreme example. But even if you live in London, you see extreme gaps in wealth, places like Chelsea or Kensington, and other places that are definitely not as rich. And in that module, you will study systematically what these inequalities are and why they exist. Then we have a module called European Society, Economy and Geography, which focuses on the European dimension. So there will be, of course, a lot of discussion about Brexit, what that means for the UK and for Europe, and how the UK stands with respect to Europe in socioeconomic terms. Then we'll have a module called Methods, Analysis and Techniques that is about research methods. So you will learn how what techniques people have developed to study these topics. So this is a lot about making you a researcher. So teaching you how to do original research. So briefly, how are we doing with time? Yeah, so the option modules, I won't go into great detail, but I'll just give you a quick idea. We have modules, for example, culture and development, geographies of revolt. So that one is about the contemporary protests that develop all over the world, such as Black Lives Matter. What are the specificities and the dynamics in these type of movements. Then managing environments is about how societies developed ways of managing environments such as frail ecosystems. So we in that module you will see a lot of examples of initiatives, for example, in conservation. So how do you make sure that urbanization doesn't destroy a forest, that doesn't kill entire species, vegetal, animal, and vegetal species. We also have, as I said, we have expertise about migration in the UK, and that is, of course, very relevant to the development of the UK as a modern, multicultural, multi-ethnic nation. In here, I can see, yeah, Cities in the Global South is a new module that we're offering that is focused on urbanization, not in the global north, such as the UK, but in the global south, with different economies and different societies, and what are the challenges of urbanization in those contexts. Then an option module is about globalization, so it's really focused on thinking about globalization and the different models of economic development in the context of globalization. Then we have race, ethnicity, and development. So you can see race between scare quotes. So this is about thinking critically about these ways of classifying human groups and racism and so on and so forth. So a very exciting option module is the Delhi field trip. So this module is called Research Applications in Human Geography, and is about applying the research methods that you have acquired in your studies to a real context of Delhi in India. So this field trip again is dependent on the pandemic situation. Right now, it would be very difficult to travel to Delhi, but we hope that during the course of the program, you will definitely be able to do it. So maybe hopefully in 2 or 3 years. All right. So a brief word about employability. You might wonder what jobs can you get after these BA. So the skills that you're acquiring in this BA are very broad and widely applicable in different sectors. So here I put a list of actual employers that have employed our former students broadly in geography. So you can see the sectors such as business, consulting and management, higher education, of course, education and training. So some people end up in education at secondary level, some people at third level, but also government and politics. So geography, well, actually, former Prime Minister of the UK, I won't mention the name, was a graduate in geography. You can work in different parts of government because geography, human geography, gives you a good understanding of the interactions between different groups in society and environmental issues. So you can see Rural Development Commission, that's a perfect example of something where human geography is extremely valuable. There are also more banking, insurance jobs, and the creative arts and culture and charity. So a lot of people working in studying human geography have a particular interest in social justice or progressive politics and all that. And that's why we have some examples of people finding employment in that sector. So just to conclude this overview, if you want to apply for the program, you can check the rules on our website. So if you Google BA Human Geography Birkbeck, you should find immediately our page where the information to apply is located. And we are more flexible than other universities in terms of admissions. And you can see here some specific information about the UCAS tariff points. We don't have time to go into detail now, so you can evaluate whether you're eligible to enroll or not. But bear in mind that we are very flexible, and we also consider work experience as relevant to assess your case. All right. So now, before giving the floor to Olivia, and that will give you a taster session, do you have any questions about what we discussed so far? So either about the structure of the program or about modules or anything else? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Just going back to see if there's anything. Okay, so you still have time to think about questions, and now I will give the floor to my colleague Olivia, who's an expert in quite appropriately in human geography. And there she is.
Hi there. Hi. I'm just going to share my screen, and I've been asked to give you a short sort of teaching taster of one of the modules that I teach on, which is globalization in the contemporary world. Let me just find. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's normal. Don't worry. It's kind of like a hall of mirrors.
Okay.
And if you open your PowerPoint, it will go away. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can make that full screen, and I will monitor the chat in the meantime.
Okay. So can you see what can you see now?
I can see your slide, and if you make that full screen,
okay.
Yeah.
So you can see the globalization in the contemporary world.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So I teach on this level 6 module, globalization in the contemporary world. So level 6, that is in year 3 if you're full-time, or year 3 or 4 if you're studying part-time. And this is one of the optional modules. And the module basically gives you an overview of different perspectives on globalization, thinking about some of the key sort of debates surrounding globalization that emerged in the 1990s, and then thinking about kind of other alternative perspectives on globalization, including kind of anti-globalization movements, thinking about global justice, thinking about climate change and these kinds of things. So this is a sort of overview of the module. I'm just putting it there to give you an idea of some of the things that we look at. So it's a range of topics from global cities and global inequality to climate change, migration and displacement. And all of these things are things that Andrea referred to when we think about human geography. And these are some of the issues that have been shaped around this concept of globalization. But really this course, the module that I teach on, is about really unpacking these sort of global and local connections. And the course is taught, as many of the options that Andreas talked about, through a range of media, including reading, which is a really important part of studying higher education. So there'll always be core readings, but also short videos, small group and whole class debates and discussions, and then quizzes, and then different writing or different forms of writing or presentation activities, as well as, all being well, field trips. So on my course, if we can, we're going to do a trip to the Museum of London Docklands, but otherwise it's something that we'll do and discuss virtually. So thinking about the spaces in which we live and study, and trying to unpack how globalization manifests itself there. But what I'm going to do now is just a sort of short teaching sample, imagining that I'm almost sort of giving a lecture, just to give you a taster of the kinds of things, the ways in which we present our ideas. Now, this isn't so much based on my research, but it would probably be part of a lecture in which I would talk about some of my own research and what I work on myself. But this is sort of to give some ideas about how we might think about globalization. And this particular lecture would be from week 8 of the course, which is about thinking about globalization in relation to food, and what I refer to as the global geographies of food. So as I talk about in the lecture, food provides a lens for thinking about globalization, for thinking about global connections and their unequal geographies. So thinking about inequality, the global and the local, and all these kinds of things. Actually, if we sort of think about food, where food comes from, where it's produced, where it's sold, where it's consumed, this actually relates to lots of these much broader global issues. And food reminds us again also, and this is what I'm going to talk about a bit here, of the links between our global past, so thinking maybe about empire, conquest, colonization, in relation to the contemporary moment, so thinking about globalization in the contemporary world. And in the lecture, I refer to certain readings, but of course, these are not expecting you to have read any of the things that I'm going to talk about, but often the lecture will be based on a certain set of readings. So talking about the literature, things, other ways in which people have conceptualized these relationships. So this is an example of how the lecture might be. It might be a quiz on last week's lecture, a short sort of online quiz, and then thinking about the links between globalization and food. And then what I'm going to talk about today, which is food and the post-colonial city, which again is thinking about food and its links to colonialism and empire and the city. And then again, this would be an example of the kind of structure of the lecture. So there would be a small group discussion, and then maybe a more kind of interactive session after the break. And then the lecture would normally be sort of guided by a series of questions. And today, this is the one that would be guiding what I'm talking about now, is how are the unequal geographies of food manifested in a contemporary global city such as London. So I wanted to start by reflecting on, this is a Black feminist scholar called Bell Hooks, and she wrote a chapter which is called Eating the Other, Desire and Resistance. And this is a starting point, I think, for what some scholars have referred to as culinary imperialism. and it connects to wider arguments about the commodification of difference. And it's just tells us something about how the consumption of so-called ethnic food, so food that we see as sort of ethnic as coming from somewhere else, as produced by the other, is very much bound up with these questions of race, oppression, and inequality. And in this chapter that might have been one of the readings for the lecture, she talks about the consumption of ethnic foods as being part of this commodification of difference. And these foods become part of how we imagine ourselves. We imagine ourselves as multicultural, as diverse, as kind of celebrating this. But whereby this diversity actually is decontextualized. It's taken away from these histories of oppression. These histories of oppression are erased. And in the UK context, this notion of the commodification of difference, or cultural appropriation, as another way of terming it, has been explored in relation to the consumption of Indian food, for example. So people talk about the national dish in the UK as being chicken tikka masala. And Uma Narayan, the Indian scholar, asks us whether eating curries draw upon and reproduce particular ways of thinking about India that are reproducing these imperial discourses of domination. And she uses this term culinary imperialism to suggest how curry becomes a symbol of how we imagine a kind of exotic India. So eating a great curry allows British consumers to forget the violent histories of colonization. And she also argues that British people often misrepresent Indian foods and the people who provide them. What they think of as Indian food is in fact a specific type of cuisine associated with parts of North India or Bangladesh, and are often altered for British tastes. So the way that we eat curry, how we buy it, where we buy it, and even the specific dishes we eat might be another form, she argues, might be another form of Western domination. And I'm sure many of you might have had been for a curry on Brick Lane, which is in East London, in the borough of Tower Hamlets. And Nicola Frost, and this would have been another reading on the reading list for this lecture, she talks again about this commodification of a particular of difference, but here she refers to this particular area of London as being kind of commodified through food, through these curry houses. So Brick Lane has been very much associated with the curry house, but it's also been at the heart of the Bangladeshi community in London, many of who migrated here in the 1970s, and a place where people have lived and sought to buy their own ingredients associated with their lives back in their home countries. But also it's been a site of contestation. People who work in these curry houses are often paid very little, catering for non-Bangladeshi consumers, and increasingly the exorbitant prices of rent in this area. And this links to other issues that we'll talk about, and that is talked about a lot in human geography, of gentrification and regeneration of London, but at whose expense? But are paid very little. Pay exorbitant rents, meaning that fewer people who actually work in these curry houses can actually live close by. So in this context, food is a medium for the transformation of this area, part of gentrification. But to what extent does it also underline or exacerbate difference and inequalities? So to what extent do they obscure difference and reinforce inequalities? So again, we can see processes of globalization intersecting with wider urban changes, such as regeneration and gentrification. So food, when apparently making society more multicultural, can, it is argued, actually perpetuate difference and inequality. So here, I've talked about curry as an example, but we can think about many examples of food that is consumed in the West, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, or the global North, which demonstrate a complex set of economic and global geographies. And these are the kind of things that we would unpack and sort of critically explore. So the ingredients that go into making curry are produced by people all over the world. And the cheap price of some ingredients arises from the economic exploitation of the people growing or manufacturing these ingredients, as well as, indeed, those who serve those products. So, for example, in the curry houses, or if we think about that, how it's manifested in particular, these inequalities are manifested in London. And two geographers, Phil Krang and Ian Cook, argue that as geographers, we need to expose these commodity chains that have brought foods onto our plates, of which consumers are frequently ignorant. So it's about thinking about the global, unpacking these global geographies of the things that are we take for granted, that are very much part of our everyday lives. But on another note, another way of thinking about food and its global connectedness. This is an example of a market called Ridley Road Market, which again is in East London, in Dalston. So some of you may have visited it. In fact, on the course in year one, on the human geography course, there's a East London field trip where this is one of the spaces that that they go to. But there are many markets like this across London which tell a story of London's diverse history and its globalisation through food. And a scholar at Goldsmiths, Alex Rees-Taylor, has done a lot of research on food and urban multiculture. And he explores food as both reflecting difference, so demonstrating this difference, as well as shaping the possibilities of connection across difference. So he sees Ridley Road Market as a space in which actually people can encounter difference and perhaps communicate across this difference through the senses. And he does what he calls a sensory ethnography. So this is again a method, a way of doing research that you might come across if you're studying human geography. And in his study of the market, he talks about how the fusion of difference fades. The fusion of different tastes and smells create moments where the dangers of cultural difference fades. So again, this is thinking about ways of perhaps addressing some of these encounters with difference, but also how particular foods, and here he talks about a mango, evoke specific and different memories, feelings and attachments that relate to these many migratory histories from across the world. So a mango is bringing people with diverse histories and connections across the globe, and bringing some kind of moment of encounter, moment of connection. And he says it's the level at the non-discursive or the sensuous that we get a taste of the processes that are shaping the culture of contemporary cities. So I'm going to end here, and just to say that food, this is an example of the everyday ways of engaging with and understanding globalization. So this is a kind of example of what we might talk about on the module, about these connections between the local and the global, and how we might critically explore them.
Great,
so
thanks.
Sharing my screen.
Yeah, you can you see the little stop.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Thanks a lot, Olivia. That was fascinating, and that makes me think about the fact that when you think about topic like human geography, what you're gonna get from this program is a transformation of how you see the world. And it sounds a bit like a cliche, if you like, but you will look at the world with different eyes. And this example of Olivia, I think, is really appropriate, because you think about ethnic food in London as something you see every day, every time you go shopping or you go to Brick Lane. And this new way of seeing it will really enrich you and will really stay with you. And you won't be able to unsee these new connections and ideas. So, do you have any questions? Yeah, so there is a question by Alessandra. Would there be some notions of urban architecture and landscaping, as like, for example, creating spaces where people can congregate like squares and so on? Let me think. Yeah, so in the context of urbanization, I think there is some content about how cities are structured and why they're structured in a certain way. So definitely, it's a really interesting aspect. And why? So a basic question would be, why are city structures structured the way they are? And it's definitely a very human geographic topic that could be studied from the perspective of architecture. So why do architects do things the way they do? What are the economic forces that constrain what they do? For example, why does the City of London look the way it looks? And cities as spaces of aggregation is definitely one of the core ideas in urbanism. So the advantage of bringing a lot of people in a relatively small space to increase interactions. So it's definitely an interesting topic. Yeah, other questions? Either to me or to Olivia about taster session. Perhaps you were getting hungry because it's lunchtime, so you can still enjoy curry even though it has a colonial undertone. Some more questions? Yeah, so sorry, the slide doesn't show very well here, but if you have any questions about what we discussed today, so this is my email address. I'm the program director, and this is our admin team. So normally the program director oversees the academic content and structure of the program, while the admin team will give you support, the sort of day-to-day support into solving practical problems in your program, so in your learning experience. Right, so feel free to contact us at any time. And if you want more information about the program, if you Google Birkbeck Human Geography, BA Human Geography, you will definitely find it. And this is the link here. And it will have information both about the part-time and full-time options. All right, so I'm happy to wait for another couple of minutes in case you have questions. Sometimes it takes time to formulate a question that you might have.
I think the question about urban architecture and landscaping, I'm sure Paul Watts,
yeah,
the introduction to human geography, a lot of that is about cities and and planning, and yeah, so very much about thinking about spaces where people come together. And
thanks for mentioning. Yeah, sorry. No, thanks for mentioning that. Definitely, urban planning is another area that I didn't mention, but the way cities are structured depends to some extent on urban planning, so that's definitely a very relevant area. So a question from Anna, are the classes going to be online or on campus in October? So this is a $1 million or pound question. We hope that we will be able to do it on campus, but it doesn't depend on us in the sense that we have to make sure that staff and students, of course, are safe. And we don't want to expose anybody to health risks. So it will depend on what the pandemic situation will be like. And we hope that, obviously, the ideal scenario is that we will be able to do everything on campus, but we can't guarantee that. But what we can guarantee is that we'll have online teaching ready, and we will give you a good learning experience, even in the online context. And we will switch to face-to-face as soon as possible. But we are currently actually ramping up our online capabilities. And we actually had some pretty positive feedback from students about our online teaching, in the sense that, of course, you don't have the same level of interaction, you don't have the kind of natural socialization that occurs in a face-to-face environment, but in terms of learning, there's a lot you can actually do online. So we hope that we will be able to compensate in that way. All right, so if there are no further questions, I thank you all for coming, and I hope this was useful, that we gave you an idea of what human geography is about. And of course, I hope to see you maybe not all of you, but at least some of you in October. All right. Thanks very much.